the recording. Tonight is April 21st, 2020, and it's Yom HaShoah, or actually the tail end of Yom HaShoah. And we don't usually have the capability of doing a Holocaust program in our shul, and this won't necessarily call it a program, but it's certainly something that is an opportunity for us to reflect and talk about Yom HaShoah. And the question that comes to my mind when I think about the Holocaust is a very familiar question, a question that we ask in a different context, and I think has to be applied here. And that question is the question of Ma nishtana, right? How is this different? Now, I don't mean how is this night different, the way that we ask it around Pesach, but what, if anything, is different about the Holocaust? That's my question for the evening, and I'm going to try and give some thoughts and answers. But let me expand upon my question, or explain what I mean by the question that I'm asking of Ma nishtana in regards to the Holocaust. We know that we make a big deal about the Holocaust. We have a Yom HaShoah for it. And the question is, why? Now, obviously, you know that we as Jews like to make a big deal about remembering and making a memory and so on. So we have other days that commemorate other major events, but not so many that commemorate other days. Like, we don't have a day that commemorates, I don't know, the Spanish Inquisition or the Crusades or the Khmelnytsky Revolt or lots of other, the pogroms or the blood libels in Damascus. These were all cases of rampant anti-Semitism, and some that were, you would say, major historical events. And yet we don't have a Yom for those days. And in some way, we have to ask the question of, is the Holocaust any different than that? And the reason why I'm going to ask, why is the Holocaust any different than those days? Because one might be tempted to say that the Holocaust, we've made a big deal about it because it's more recent, and maybe because it's connected to the state of Israel's formation. So maybe the fact that we now have a sovereign state allows us to make this kind of statement and have a day, a Yom HaShoah. And maybe logistically that's true, but you may remember that not so long ago we had the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the camps at Auschwitz. So 75 years ago, the Holocaust basically ended. I don't mean the ramifications of it, but what the Germans were doing what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish people effectively came to an end around 75 years ago. And that means that a fact that we know that's slowly coming to be, which is people who were alive during the time of the Holocaust, there's less and less of those people. Last night, for those who watched the Holocaust Remembrance Program that I sent out on from the Yeshiva of Flatbush, so it had the students interact with survivors. And if you paid attention to the ages of the survivors, the younger one of the younger ones was 92. One of the survivors, one of the older ones was 99. It doesn't last long, and there's going to be a time that is in the not too distant future where the people who were alive during the time of the Holocaust will no longer be alive. And I don't even mean the people who experienced it. I mean the people who were alive somewhere else, or even shortly thereafter. And the Holocaust is going to go from being an event that we have people that can talk to us firsthand, and that can relay the story, that we could say, oh, I spoke to a survivor today, that's going to stop being in the not too distant future, which is tragic in and of itself, but it's just the natural course of the way things work. The Holocaust is going to move from recent history to a more distant history. And the question will then be, should the Holocaust, after a period of time, be this major event that has a day and a religiosity almost to the way that we observe it and so on? Is this something that will fade after a little while? Is this something, and the answer to that will be the answer to the question that I started with, which is Manish Tana. How is the Holocaust different? Is the Holocaust different? Is the Holocaust as powerful as it is just because it's what we grew up with, it's what we were connected to personally, but after a while, it will just become another tragic event in the long line of Jewish history? I'll quote another line which we say in the Haggadah, Lo echad bilvad amad alenu lechalotenu. There wasn't one Hitler, so to speak, that stood up and said, I'm going to kill a lot of Jews. This is something that we've seen play out, unfortunately, again and again in history. And who's to say that there won't be something that won't come along that won't be terrible? And what would we do then? So I think that's a question. I've actually even heard some Jewish thinkers, I don't want to name anyone specifically, who don't really like the idea of Yom HaShoah. They don't like the idea of a Holocaust Day and feel that, no, a Holocaust is not so different. It's not worse than the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash 1 or 2, or the exile in the year 722 BCE, or the Spanish Inquisition. And those days don't have a day. Those days are Tisha B'Av, which is the national day of mourning. So perhaps the Holocaust should just be lumped in with those days. That's a question that I think people ask, sometimes explicitly, sometimes they ask it in the back of their minds. And I think any question is a fair question. I've heard a lot of people who've heard that question not like that question because they have such a visceral feeling towards the Holocaust that they can't. It does hold a special place. It is different, but the question is, why? Is it just because it's personal to them or what they were taught? Or is there something special about the Holocaust? That's my question. And I want to not only talk about that aspect of it, because I want to talk about something else, which is everything until now I've been talking about from a Jewish standpoint. But what about other what I'll call acts of genocide that have taken place? And I'm just going to go back. I made a short list of recent memory. Okay, when I listened to this since the Holocaust, effectively since the Holocaust, these have happened: Aleppo, ISIS, Darfur, Rwanda, Serbia, Cambodia, the Gulag. All of those. You're talking about major killings of masses of people, none of them Jews. It's not acts of anti-Semitism. On some of those items, you're talking about millions of people dying. So I ask a tough question, which is uncomfortable for us: is the Holocaust any different? Right? Are those things just other versions of the Holocaust? And if so, what's different? And this is important today, maybe more than ever, because I think what you're going to find also, another area where we have to talk about it, is people ridiculously, but nevertheless they do it, try and turn the Holocaust against the Jews or against the state of Israel at certain times, where they feel, if someone feels that the way something happened in the West Bank or in Gaza or something like that, they'll show you an Israeli tank, and some Palestinian throwing a rock, and this is like the Holocaust. They'll say things like that, and I think we know that's ridiculous because we know, but why, right? Why is the Holocaust so different? And that last question is probably the easiest one to answer, but not really. And I want to kind of talk about this. So before I go further and give some of the things that I think, I want to actually open the floor. I'm going to actually, just unmute yourself and speak up and say what you think. Do you think this is a valid question, number one? And number two, in what way is the Holocaust different, or maybe it shouldn't be different? So I'm curious to hear what people have to say. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like, and talk about what you think might be different.
Unfortunately, since the Holocaust, it's become almost a more normal event. Like all of the things that you listed. Stalin killed millions and millions of people in Russia over a longer period of time, not as compressed as the Holocaust, but Stalin killed millions of people. What you said, like you said, what's going on in Syria, the estimate says 500,000-600,000 people. And so the idea that there's mass killings, it's really become, unfortunately, and the Holocaust is the prototypical example. That's right. What it is.
Yeah. Abe?
I think if it wasn't for the state of Israel, we would not have a Yom HaShoah today. I think because of the state of Israel was born through the Holocaust, that we have this kind of day. And it'll last as long as the state of Israel lasts, and it should last forever. We'll have that day.
Right. So you think it's because it's integrally tied to the state of Israel, that's how it came about, and that's why it happens. Is it valid? Meaning, is that a reason? Because Yom HaShoah isn't really...
We can make it any way we want. Just, it's part of our culture, and we can do it. I mean, we're not asking the world to accept today as Yom HaShoah. We're just doing it internally.
Well, actually, I'm going to push back on that a little bit and say, we have pushed pretty strongly that the rest of the world recognize the Holocaust. We don't push that they recognize the Spanish Inquisition, right? I mean, maybe we push Spain a little bit, but not. If you remember, some of you may remember, I spoke about this when I went to Pittsburgh as part of the Etz Chaim thing. When we went to visit the families that lost people, but also we visited the police station in Pittsburgh. This was the most impactful part for me, was when we visited the SWAT team that went in and took the guy out. And when the captain of the police said to me, the reason we do what we do is because we believe that the police are the difference between the United States of America and Nazi Germany. We train our policemen when they're in the academy. We take them to the Pittsburgh Holocaust Memorial, whatever that means, right? And we tell them, we teach them about Kristallnacht and how the police not only stood idly by and let it happen, but actually participated, and that it is our responsibility as these are not Jewish people, mind you, and this is not New York City, right? It's Pittsburgh, right? And they say, and it's our responsibility because of the Holocaust, right? And I wonder, should that be, because it's why the Holocaust? Why don't we talk about something else, right? Why, is the Holocaust, is it just because it's recent? Is it just because we have videos of it? Or is there more to it than that? And again, why don't they talk about, why does he talk about the Holocaust? Who cares about the Jews, right? It's Pittsburgh. Well, I mean, granted, there have to be a good number of Jews in Pittsburgh, but it's not New York, right? Why doesn't he talk about Rwanda? Why doesn't he talk about Cambodia? Where a lot of people died, and it was very serious things. As my dad said, there was a time where they estimated that Stalin killed many more people than Hitler did. That is not the fact, as far as they can tell today. But the point being is, many, when you're talking about millions killed in Rwanda, in Cambodia, what happened? Why don't we use those as the example that we say, hey, don't forget that. The Holocaust is taught in history books today, in classrooms today. We make a point of this, of the United States of America, right? When you go to Washington, D.C., there's a Holocaust museum. There's not a Spanish Inquisition museum, a Churban Bayit Rishon or Bayit Sheni museum. Why not? Is there and is it just because of Israel? Maybe, and maybe that's one of the great things about Israel, is that it kind of, quote, puts us on the map. It's a possibility. It's definitely a possibility. Any other thoughts? Anyone else want to contribute any idea or something? Ezra?
My thoughts is that Rwanda was localized. It was two groups, one fighting the other. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people killed. Darfur is the same thing. Syria, they rebelled, so he went after them, Assad. Each one, although millions of people, hundreds of thousands were killed and hurt and displaced, it's a tragedy, but nothing was like the Holocaust in a way where it was one country wanting to take over the world and spread their ideology, and at the same time kill a race based on their religious ancestry. And it was like organized, systemized, well-planned, prepared. It wasn't just going out and just killing people with machetes. And I think that organized hate and spread of death and violence by a pretty high, pretty sophisticated and smart society. It's not a bunch of Africans with no education. I think that's what makes it very special.
Right.
I honestly, Spanish Inquisition. Yeah, you can't practice to be a Jew. You accept it or you're burned at the stake. Here, you're quarter Jewish, and that's it. Gas chambers.
Right.
So I think it's very different from everyone you spoke about.
Right. So, I think you're right, and I think you've articulated some of the points that I want to get to. What I'd like to work off of is a piece written by a contemporary, a modern Jewish philosopher. His name is he's from France, Bernard Henri Lévy, and he asked this question, and he says, "Let me say what I think these are not." And he says, "I don't believe the Holocaust is different because of the scale." Meaning, we might be tempted to say 6 million, and certainly when we say something like that, I don't know that there's ever been another time where there's been that many. But when you say that the Gulag is 2 million, and you say that Rwanda may be 1 million, and Cambodia may be 2 million, you start saying, is that really the difference, right? In other words, every life is so precious. Are we going to start saying that this is so different because there's this many million people? He says no, and I tend to agree with him, because these other situations are, in their devastation in terms of scale, I don't want to say equally awesome, but they are sufficiently awesome that they would be on the they would be of what we'll call a comparable scale. That's number one that he says. He says, perhaps you'll say, something that my dad alluded to at one point, which is, the Gulag, what Stalin had done maybe took place over 20 years, although when you look at Nazi Germany, it's kind of the same type of thing also. But you might say it was such a fast pace, or as Ezra said, like systematic. But if you look at Rwanda, what happened in like 10 weeks, that they killed, close to 1 million people in 10 weeks. So that may not be so different either. And certainly one of the things that the Holocaust brought out was untold levels of cruelty. And perhaps that's it. But, the cruelty, hard to compare because there's so much cruelty and so many other actions and things that happen. I don't know that it's the cruelty that makes the difference. He outlines three things that he feels set the Holocaust apart from anything else that happened in terms of any other genocides, and I would say anything else that happened even in Jewish history as well. The first that he says is the finality of it, and Ezra, you kind of said this as well, where you don't have another situation where someone says, I'm going to wipe off an entire group of people off the map. And when I say off the map, I don't mean in any localized place. They had a concept called Juden-free, where they were going to completely track down any Jew anywhere in the world and wipe them out. They were going to completely annihilate the Jewish people. They were planning to build some kind of small museum. I'm going to come back to this, but to the remnant of a Jewish people, that is no comparison. And I think that's the first thing that I believe makes the Holocaust to this point incomparable. And the truth is, even going forward, incomparable, because you can't do more than that, right? No one could exceed that kind of concept. So I think that's the first aspect of what separates the Holocaust, is its finality. The second is the no appeal, no escape. There was no way for a Jewish person to buy his or her way out of it. And even if they temporarily, if the Nazis had gone to where they wanted to get to, and as Ezra said, well, they were looking to dominate the world, and I haven't read it or watched the movies, but I saw that they're making a movie now out of the book The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. If Hitler had his way, and not only Hitler, people that supported Hitler, and there were a lot of people that supported Hitler, including here. There were huge rallies to support the Nazi Party in America during the time of when the Holocaust was going on. If they had their way, there was absolutely nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no way out. And that's not something that was true in all the other cases. In the other cases, even though it was very, if you were able to escape Cambodia, which they made it very difficult to do, but if you were able to escape Cambodia, okay, if Cambodians that got to America, or got to Korea or wherever else they could escape to, which again would have been very difficult, and that was it. And no one was going to bother them again. That was not true of the Jewish people. Hitler was coming for the Jews anywhere and everywhere. Even though we know, like on Avi's point about Israel and how people went to Israel and so on, but a few things go differently with Rommel and North Africa, and history is very different. And Israel wasn't a place to escape to as well. So the finality of it, the totality of it, and also the no appeal, no place to go, I think makes it unique. And then the last thing that Levy says is tremendously different, is that the Nazis didn't only want to kill the Jewish people, they wanted to completely annihilate them from memory, completely erase them. And not only them, their culture and everything, not only us, our culture and everything about us. They basically wanted to just leave one or two remnants of one or two places in order to say, yeah, these people don't exist anymore. To make that point that they don't exist anymore, but not to allow them. They were completely wiped out, and that was part of why, Ezra pointed out that they were looking for 1/4 of a Jewish person. Anyone that would have any aspect, any element of anything to do with Judaism, they were completely wiping out. And in that sense, in these three senses, the Holocaust is unique. It is different than anything else, and therefore it does merit a different place, not only in our memory, although definitely in our memory, but also in the memory of all of mankind, all of humanity. And we have to understand this because there are people that are out in the world, aside from the standard Holocaust deniers who will tell you it never happened. I think that's, I never understood how anyone could really, that's like, it's like the people who say the world is flat and they didn't land on the moon and, all that other stuff. Okay, if you want to believe that, all right. It's hard but there are people that want to, make things equivalent, and there are a lot of people in the very far left of the progressive, what's called the progressive world today, that want to equate all sorts of things to the Holocaust. They do not equate. And I think it's important for us to understand that they do not equate. And that doesn't mean now, and what's interesting about us, and which is different than those that try and make those equations, and I think important for us to realize is so many people will turn to the Holocaust as the standard, right? And I don't think any of them will ever measure up, but I don't think it's terrible that they try and compare it as the standard, because what we should be able to look at the Holocaust and say, this was pure evil. This was the worst it can get, and has ever gotten, because you can't do more than what they were trying to do. You can't make more than what the Nazis stood for, and that we should be able to compare that. In order to be able to evaluate situations, that people do this, and I think if they're understanding the full nature of the Holocaust, then that'll be okay. And when they don't, that's when it's a problem. So that's why what I'm trying to bring out, the things that I'm saying tonight, is that it's very important for us to understand the magnitude of the Holocaust, not simply because of the things that we said that are the same, that others could compare, in terms of scale or pace or cruelty. Those things, those things are not where you make the comparison. Where you make the comparison is on the points that we've said now, of the finality, the lack of appeal, the totality of trying to erase people completely. And it's important for us to remember that that as Jews, this is what we are up against, and we don't want to think that moment to moment, day to day, but the reality is that we are singular in that people have tried to do this to us, and that we cannot forget that aspect of that. That's what it means to be Jewish. When you're a Jew, you're part of a people that that has been looked at this way, that has been treated this way, that others, still look up to. The Nazi ideology is not fully dead, and people say things like Hitler should have finished the job, and things like that, and we have to keep that in mind, and we have to be aware of that, and therefore Yom HaShoah is what I would call a Yom Kadosh. It is a day that, maybe it came about, like A.B. said, just because of Israel and its connection to Israel and so on. But the Holocaust itself mandates this. It requires us to treat it this seriously. It requires us that even after the survivors are gone, even after, we can't have someone's grandmother or great-grandmother come in to speak to our children, we need to have Holocaust programs. We need to make sure that we need to have Pittsburgh Holocaust memorials. We need to have Yad Vashem. We need to have the Washington Museum of the Holocaust. These are very, very important things, not only for the Jewish people, but for all of humanity, because the Holocaust is that. And the awful things that Ezra pointed out, we have to appreciate that man, as Ezra said nicely, the Germans were considered the most sophisticated, the most advanced people, and that people can turn to that. And for us to remember that and when I say turn to that, to turn to the full evil in its full totality and all the things that we're talking about, that humans are capable of that. It's important for us to use the Holocaust to show how off the rails things can get, and we can't forget it. We can't let our children forget it. We can't let our grandchildren forget it. We can't let their grandchildren forget it. And in that way, it is different than anything else that's happened ever before to us or to anybody else. And I think we have to not forget not only the Holocaust, but not forget this aspect of the Holocaust. So that's the message that I wanted to share tonight. I appreciate you taking of your time and joining. I hope I've given you something to think about, and I appreciate all the input that everyone gave. If anyone has anything that they want to add or say, that's my end. I'm opening the floor.
Joey?
Yes.
There's one aspect of the Holocaust that supports what you said and what Ezra said before, that people are not really totally aware of. Starting in February of 1944, the war was pretty much decided by then. The Germans knew they were going to lose the war. They had very few supplies. They were losing soldiers left and right, and D-Day was going to happen in a little while. Despite that, Eichmann went to Hungary, where there were 500,000 Jews. At that point in time, Hungary was under Nazi control, but they had not been fully absorbed into the Nazi stratosphere, let's call it. He went and he forced the president of Hungary to start rounding up the Jews. They built special railroad tracks to transport. In 56 days, they transported 450,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz, half of which never lived a day in Auschwitz. As soon as they got there, they were selected. Half of them, just by chance, went straight to the gas chambers, and the other half were added to the workforce. They murdered 250,000 people in 56 days and wiped out Hungarian Jewry. And most of, if not all of the pictures that we see in Yad Vashem and in Washington and in New York Memorial Museum, the pictures that you see are all taken of these Hungarian Jews arriving in Auschwitz and being literally murdered for no other reason. They had no interest. They were in Hungary. The war was over. It was finished. But Eichmann wouldn't let it rest. And this is documented in a couple of books and pictures and things like that. I learned this when I went to Auschwitz. It's an amazing, amazing story of brutality and absolute, as you say, evil. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really confirms what we were talking about in terms of how evil they were and how total they were trying to do this. So I think that definitely confirms that. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here. Wish everyone a